In that day there shall be an altar to the Lord in the midst of the land of Egypt, and a pillar at the border of it to the Lord. Now that's kind of a weird phrase. In that day there shall be an altar to the Lord in the midst of the land of Egypt. Okay. And a pillar at the border of it to the Lord. The next verse says, and it shall be for a sign. Now wait a minute. That means that the pillar, and which also could be monument, the monument and the altar are the same thing, right? Because it mentions it twice, but in typical Hebrew structure, they'll often say something two different ways. As you read the Proverbs, you'll notice the whole concept of Hebrew poetry is not meter and rhyme. It's putting two ideas in juxtaposition. Sometimes they're contrasts, sometimes they're comparisons, which are different. And sometimes they're the same thing just said two ways, right? That's the typical Hebrew style. Here, though, it says, in that day there shall be an altar to the Lord in the midst of the land of Egypt, and a pillar at the border of it to the Lord. Well, you and I would think that something that's in the middle of the country and something that's in the border would be a contradiction. Turns out, though, that when we sent an ambassador to check out the Suez Canal progress way back when, the cartographer, he happened to notice in studying Cairo and the rest, he noticed two things simultaneously. One is that Egypt traditionally has been the marriage of two countries, Upper and Lower Egypt. Upper Egypt being the southern part, that is upriver, Lower Egypt being the delta region. And the Pharaoh of Egypt always had a helmet or a crown that was two colors, red and white, for Upper and Lower Egypt. His title, all through the many dynasties of Egypt, he was the Pharaoh of Upper and Lower Egypt. Where is the border between Upper and Lower Egypt? Right through a place called Giza, which in Arabic means border. It also happens that that place is a place that if you look at the northern part of Egypt, it is like a quadrant of a circle. In other words, 1/4 of a circle. Because the Nile Delta is almost a perfect curve, radius. And if you put a compass to draw that, and the point of your compass sits at a place called Giza, which in Arabic means border. What is located at that point? The Great Pyramid. So many scholars feel that Isaiah chapter 19, verses 19 and 20 refer to the Great Pyramid. If that's true, it's kind of interesting. In that day there shall be an altar to the Lord in the midst of the land of Egypt, and a pillar at the border of it to the Lord. And it shall be for a sign, and a witness unto the Lord of hosts in the land of Egypt. Really? For they shall cry unto the Lord because of the oppressors, and he shall send them a Savior, a great one, and he shall deliver them. Whew, kind of neat. Kind of interesting. I'll come back to this. Let's just finish the chapter, and then we'll come back to that whole issue. The more you study the Great Pyramid of Egypt, the more mysterious it becomes. The first thing you'll learn if you really dig into this is that it's not Egyptian. Manethos, which is one of the main priestly scribes who kept a chronicle upon which we build most of our understanding of the early dynasties and the ancient history of Egypt, records the building of the Great Pyramid as occurring by a group of people that came. He called them the Hyksos. He presumed they were from Arabia or somewhere. They came and took over the country without a battle. Some scholars infer by some kind of mind control. When they came, they destroyed all the polytheistic temples and shrines. They built the Great Pyramid and then left. Strange stuff. Strange stuff. As we study the Great Pyramid, we're fascinated because, see, all the other pyramids of Egypt are set up for tombs. The tombs are underneath the pyramid. The pyramid itself is essentially solid. The tomb is underneath the pyramid. The Great Pyramid at Giza is very, very different. It is filled with angles and channels and passageways, and next time we meet, we'll have a view graph, and I'll take you through this. Many people in history have presumed that the pyramid at Giza was designed to be just a complicated labyrinth of tombs, except it's never been used that way. It turns out that the Great Pyramid, first of all, its physical structure is rather staggering. It covers 13 acres. It has 6.5 million tons of stones, some of which weigh 15 tons each. They are fitted together within a precision of, the cracks are true to within 1/50th of an inch. The passageways are so precise, like within a 50th of an inch in a 150-foot span, you would have a tough time building it today with laser-aligned drilling tools. It is level within 1 inch on 13 acres. If anybody's in surveying, think about that. The precision of the fittings are more precise in relative to their linear lengths than the tiles on our space shuttle. But that's just the beginning. It's lined up exactly with the cardinal points, the meridians of the earth, due north, south, and all that. The mathematics of the Great Pyramid include frequently 54 different ways it speaks of the number pi in mathematics, the ratio of which is something that the experts didn't think Egyptians discovered for 1,000 years later. The ratio of pi over e, if you're in calculus, is embodied in the structures. If you look at the dimensions of the Great Pyramid, you discover that it is a mathematical model of our solar system. The distance of the earth to the sun, the size of the earth, and so forth. And the more you get into this, it's easy to get caught up in this thing and totally absorbed and become what some people call a pyramidiot, okay? But what makes it such a provocative thing is there are those that believe that the internal passageways of the Great Pyramid lay out the gospel. That the passageways, the angles, speak of the exodus of Egypt, the birth of Christ, the time of his baptism, and I'll take you through it easier with a diagram, why people have embraced that idea. Part of the search of the Great Pyramid has to do with determining its basic unit of measure, called a pyramid inch. It turns out that the pyramid is 5,449 pyramid inches high. If you take the Hebrew text, Isaiah chapter 19, verse 19 and 20 in Hebrew, and take the numerical values of the letters, what do you think it adds up to? 5,449, the height of the pyramid in pyramid inches. So, on it goes, and I'll share with you some of the things that they've discovered, or feel they've discovered, about the Great Pyramid, which makes it appear that it fits this very thing that God talks about in Isaiah 19, right? Okay, that's just for starters, friends. In the Salisbury Plain in England, there is a monument called Stonehenge. And I had occasion for a number of reasons many years ago to study it intensely, for a lot of reasons. And of course, Gerald Hawkins is famous for his discovery that that ancient monument, built 3,500 years ago or more, is in fact an astronomical computer. It predicts eclipses, among other things. And it's hard to talk about Stonehenge without having diagrams, so we'll talk about Stonehenge too, but its architecture is built around 4 key stones that make an approximate rectangle. There's only one latitude in the northern hemisphere where a rectangle would have the predictive properties that it has, and Stonehenge is less than a mile from that latitude. And the rectangle is just a hair off, and it's the exact adjustment you need to make up for that mile so that it will predict certain things. The 2 diagonal stones of that rectangle point in azimuth to 118 degrees from north, which lines it up directly with the Great Pyramid of Egypt. People who have studied Stonehenge believe that the same architect had to build both of them. That the Great Pyramid in Egypt and the monument at Stonehenge were masterminded by the same architect. The speculations are all over the map, and we'll go over those next time, but they include the idea that both monuments were built by Shem, the son of Noah. And I'll show you why they believe that next time. What we'll also talk about, though, all that sounds great until you take a close look at some of the footage that came back from the probes of Mars, the NASA photographs. Because on those photographs, it appears, this is very controversial, And I'll show you the pictures and you can decide for yourself. There appears to be monuments on Mars. There's a 5, not a 4, 5-sided pyramid on Mars. And one of the parts of the pyramid is adjusted just a little bit, so it happens to conform exactly to the proportions that Da Vinci has in his famous Pyramid of Man, if you recall. And we'll show you that one in the pictures. But the most dramatic thing on Mars is what appears to be a carefully crafted human face over a mile across. Eyebrows, nose, mouth, absolutely symmetrical. A face, a human face. Now, not only is that bizarre to find on Mars, but it would seem that it's probably 500,000 years old. Now, what does all this mean? Well, first of all, when you look at it, you can say, gee, maybe it just happened it's one of these freaky things that just happened by accident. Well, there's some problems with that, because the face and the pyramids and something that looks like a fort are separate. They're all lined up north and south with Mars, which is kind of interesting. But they're spaced, where the shortest unit is 1, 2, 4, and 8. It's very regular in its apparent spacing. So there are those. I don't think anyone is selling it hard that it really is for sure a monument, and yet it's too precise to ignore. And yet, so it's either meaningless or incredibly profound as to whether they're artificial or not. See, the other thing that people have discovered is that the ancient Egyptian culture is known among scholars as having a strange paradox in that it starts at a high level. There isn't a buildup. The earliest records of Egypt have central government, mathematics, astronomy, all kinds of skills. And it puzzles them because it isn't as if there's sort of a buildup, a growth, a learning period. They're just there. The same thing's true in Mesopotamia, the Sumerian culture. They have language. Now they're beginning to discover there's some links between them. Now, that causes scholars to be puzzled. Science has a gigantic dilemma because anyone that is informed today cannot buy evolution. It's an old idea that we were all brought up on, but it's nonsense. Current discoveries in most fields of science have totally debunked the idea that biogenesis occurred by itself. That's preposterous. The cosmologists now in the current insights to the so-called Big Bang models clearly demonstrate that the universe is finite and had a beginning, that not only matter and energy, but time and space started. You could argue about exactly when, but it had a beginning. That's embarrassing. Because it had a beginning, somebody had to start it. Secondly, since 1957 and the discovery of the DNA molecule and the discovery that the DNA code is a digital code, error-correcting digital code, is mind-blowing. It totally destroys the idea that we're here in the absence of design. So science has got a problem. How are they going to begin to re-rationalize our whole tradition? Well, there's one thing on the surface, on the horizon. The idea of extraterrestrial involvement. Well, why would some extraterrestrials traveling from some other galaxy land on Mars rather than the Earth? The Earth is far more hospitable. Not to interstellar travel, because the enemy of those kind of organisms is gravity, if you're gravityless for that long. So Mars is 1/3 the gravity of the Earth and does not have the storms. So it would be a natural colonization base to springboard to the Earth. Now they go through and they're starting to discover that some of the early translational problems in Sumerian and Egyptian text suggest the idea of extraterrestrial visitors. Very interesting, because you can begin to see what's coming. Suppose, I'm conjecturing, somebody discovers something on Mars that does seem to indicate that those structures are synthetic or artificial. You can begin to see the whole scenario. If you could validate this rather provocative conjecture, you throw out the window all of Western civilization, you throw out the window all of the traditions of modern man. Now, it doesn't take any imagination to begin to put together what the Bible talks about in terms of the strong delusion. Because he says he will send strong delusion so that they should believe the lie. And it would deceive, if it were possible, even the very elect. But fortunately, it's not possible. Why not? For supernaturally. Now, we will go through all of this next time with diagrams and stuff and let you judge for yourself. But let me tell you very frankly, right up front, There is only one way you can protect yourself against being deceived, and that's by being in Jesus Christ. We're going to be quickly moving into a world where the only way you're going to be able to have the truth is by the supernatural support and involvement of your Lord and Savior. So we'll get at that next time with diagrams and such. It should be kind of a wild evening. We'll show you what this is really all about, and also go in a little more deeply as to what it implies, what it looks like could be on the horizon in terms of the wildest lie, the biggest fraud Satan has ever sprung. By the way, a couple of facts you should have. The city of Cairo in Egypt was named after the Arabic word for Mars. When you read in the Bible, Baal, the worship of Baal is the worship of the planet Mars. So this will begin to all tie together, but make no mistake about it so you don't misread me. I believe that these things on Mars, if they're real, and that's an if, I believe they're occultic. I believe it's Satan's positioning for his grand scheme. Now, whether Stonehenge and the pyramid are or are not part of his scheme doesn't matter, because he's perfectly capable of perverting whatever is around to his foolishness.